My name is Ethan. I've always been the one people turn to for support, for a level head amidst the chaos. But the day my uncle died, everything changed. Something inside me shifted, and I can't quite explain it. It started with the voice, and the name only he used to call me. You see, my uncle Michael lived in Mexico, a place I had left behind years ago. He had been battling cancer for what felt like an eternity. At times, it seemed like he might win, but the disease, that silent, relentless beast, finally claimed him after his surgery. I got the call early that morning from my cousin. Michael was gone. Just like that. It fell on me to tell my father, his brother. My father was always a stoic man, hard to read, but when I broke the news to him, I saw the walls he had built crumble. The sadness in his eyes. I'd never seen him like that. He looked so vulnerable, and for a moment, I hated him for it. Weakness disgusted me, but I buried that feeling deep. Later that evening, we decided to go to the store to grab a few things for dinner. It was one of those mundane tasks that helped mask the grief, even if only for a while. Once inside, we split up. My dad went off to find something, and I wandered the aisles alone. That's when I heard it. My nickname. The one only Uncle Michael used to call me. "Hey, little shadow," the voice said, smooth and deliberate. It stopped me in my tracks. The tone was familiar, yet it wasn't quite right. It sounded almost like my dad's voice, but deeper, darker. He never called me that. He had his own names for me. Only Michael had ever used that phrase. I turned, scanning the aisles, expecting to see my dad. But no one was there. My pulse quickened as the voice came again, this time more insistent. "Little shadow, come here." Against my better judgment, I followed it. The sound led me deeper into the store, away from the main aisles, into a section where the flickering fluorescent lights created unsettling shadows. Each step felt heavier, like I was moving through molasses. "Little shadow, I need you," it said again. I wasn't afraid, not exactly. If anything, I was curious, drawn to it. Something about the voice felt commanding, almost hypnotic. Finally, I turned a corner and saw my dad standing at the far end of the aisle, chatting with an old friend of his. He looked calm, unaffected. I approached him, trying to shake off the chill running down my spine. "Dad, were you calling me just now?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He shook his head, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. "No, I wasn't." "Why?" I didn't answer him. I just stood there, staring at him. I wanted to believe him, but the voice had been so real, so certain. Underscore, 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 underscore. That night, when my mom called, I hesitated to tell her about what had happened. I didn't want to upset my dad any further, and honestly, I wasn't sure if I'd imagined the whole thing. But the story spilled out of me anyway, like a confession I couldn't keep inside. "Ethan, listen to me," she said after a long pause. Her voice was trembling. "Last night, I had a dream about your uncle. He looked worried, like he had something he needed to say. I think he's trying to reach out, not to scare you, but because he's worried about your father. Maybe he's trying to tell you something." Her words should have comforted me, but they didn't. Instead, they lit a fire in me, a dark curiosity. If Uncle Michael was reaching out from beyond, what else could he do? What else could I do? I didn't tell her what I was really thinking. How could I? Because in that moment, I wasn't scared anymore. I was intrigued, and I wanted to know just how far this connection could go. The night after my mother's call, sleep came reluctantly. My mind churned with thoughts of Uncle Michael and the voice in the store. The words echoed in my head, pulling at threads of curiosity and fear in equal measure. Little Shadow. I hadn't heard that name in years, and yet it resonated with an almost magnetic pull. I wanted to believe it was just my imagination, But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Around midnight, I found myself sitting at the edge of my bed, staring at the faint outline of the window. The moonlight painted thin streaks across the walls. That's when I heard it again. This time, it wasn't a voice calling my name. It was more like a faint whisper, unintelligible but persistent, drifting in and out like a breeze carrying secrets. My heart pounded as I stood and moved toward the window, drawn by the sound. The world outside was still and quiet, the kind of silence that felt too heavy, too deliberate. I opened the window, letting the cool night air wash over me, and strained to hear more clearly. "Ethan," the whisper came again, soft and fleeting, like a sigh carried on the wind. I shivered, but it wasn't from the cold. I felt seen, as if something was watching me from the shadows beyond the trees. For a moment, I considered calling out, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I stayed frozen, staring into the darkness, hoping and dreading that I'd hear it again. Nothing. I closed the window and stepped back, my breathing uneven. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks, the result of too much stress and too little sleep. But as I lay back down, the feeling of being watched didn't leave me. If anything, it grew stronger. Underscore 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 underscore. The following day, I couldn't shake the unease. My dad had gone to work early, leaving me alone in the house. The quiet felt oppressive, each creak of the floorboards amplifying my paranoia. I busied myself with mundane tasks, trying to ignore the lingering sensation that something wasn't right. By mid-afternoon, I found myself drawn to the box of old family photos tucked away in the corner of the living room. I hadn't looked through them in years, but now the urge was irresistible. I sifted through the yellowed images, smiling faintly at the memories they held. And then I found it, a picture of Uncle Michael and me, taken when I was about 7. He had his arm around me, a wide grin on his face. I was laughing, clutching a small toy car he'd given me that day. On the back of the photo, in his unmistakable handwriting, were the words, "To my little shadow, always." My chest tightened as I stared at the picture. The nickname, the voice, it all felt too connected to ignore. Without thinking, I slipped the photo into my pocket and headed upstairs to my room. That night, the whispers returned, louder this time. They didn't come from outside, though. They came from the mirror in my room. I'd left the light on, and the reflections seemed sharper, almost unnaturally vivid. As I approached, the whispers grew more distinct, forming words that sent chills down my spine. "Little shadow, it's time." The voice wasn't just familiar. It was commanding, filled with an urgency I couldn't ignore. My reflection stared back at me, but something was wrong. The eyes looking back weren't mine. They were darker, deeper, and they seemed to see through me. "Time for what?" I whispered, my voice trembling. The reflection didn't answer. Instead, it smiled, a slow, knowing smile that sent a shiver down my spine. Then the image in the mirror shifted. It wasn't me anymore. It was Uncle Michael, his face pale and gaunt, his eyes burning with an intensity that felt both familiar and terrifying. "Protect him," he said, his voice echoing in the small room. "Protect your father. But first, you must understand." "Understand what?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The image flickered, and for a moment, I thought it would disappear. But then Michael's face grew stern, almost angry. "The shadow is yours now, Ethan. Embrace it." The room seemed to tilt, and I stumbled back, breaking the connection. When I looked again, the mirror showed only my reflection, pale and shaken. But his words lingered in the air, heavy and undeniable. Protect your father. Embrace the shadow. I didn't know what it meant, but I knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. I spent the following days in a haze, my thoughts consumed by Uncle Michael's message. Protect your father. Embrace the shadow. The words played on an endless loop in my mind, each repetition adding to the weight pressing down on me. What did it mean? And why me? Questions swirled, but no answers came. The house felt different, colder, darker, even in the middle of the day. Shadows seemed to linger in the corners longer than they should, moving just out of sight. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination running wild. But deep down I knew better. Underscore, 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 underscore. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold, I decided to confront the mirror again. My reflection stared back at me, tired and haunted. I waited, hoping for a sign, but the glass remained silent. Frustrated, I turned away. Ethan. The voice was clearer this time, resonating through the room. I spun around, and there he was again. Uncle Michael's image stared at me from the mirror, his expression grim. What do you want from me? I demanded, my voice trembling despite my efforts to stay calm. You've always been my little shadow, he said, his tone heavy with emotion. And now the shadow is yours. To protect your father, you must accept it. Accept what? I asked, exasperation creeping into my voice. You're not making any sense. His image flickered, and for a moment, I thought he would disappear. But then he leaned closer, his face filling the glass as if trying to step through it. You'll understand soon, he said. But you must be ready. The shadow will test you. If you fail, your father will pay the price. Before I could respond, the room plunged into darkness. The lights flickered, and the air grew heavy. A low, guttural growl rumbled through the silence, sending a chill down my spine. Underscore, 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 underscore. The next few days were a blur. The shadows followed me everywhere, growing bolder with each passing hour. They moved in ways shadows shouldn't, twisting and writhing as if alive. I felt them watching me, waiting for me to acknowledge them. One night, as I sat in my room, the air around me grew icy. The shadows gathered, coalescing into a form that loomed over me. It had no defined shape, just a mass of darkness with glowing eyes that burned like embers. Embrace me, it whispered, its voice a chilling blend of Michael's and something ancient. Fear gripped me, but alongside it came a strange sense of familiarity. This shadow wasn't just a part of Uncle Michael. It was a part of me. I reached out, my hand trembling, and touched the darkness. It enveloped me, cold and suffocating, but also empowering. Memories that weren't mine flooded my mind. I saw Michael as a young man, protecting my father from danger, wielding the shadow as a shield and a weapon. I understood now. The shadow wasn't just a burden. It was a legacy, passed down to the one who could bear it. Underscore, 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 underscore. When I woke the next morning, the shadows were gone, but their presence lingered within me. I felt stronger, more aware. My father seemed lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from him, though he said nothing about it. Maybe he knew, or maybe he felt the shift without understanding it. Uncle Michael didn't appear again, but his words stayed with me. Protect your father. Embrace the shadow. I didn't know what challenges lay ahead, but I knew I was ready to face them. The shadow was mine now, and I would use it to keep my family safe, no matter the cost. As the days turned to weeks, I began to understand the true power of the shadow. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a part of me, a constant reminder of Michael's sacrifice and the responsibility he had entrusted to me. I embraced it fully, knowing that the darkness within me was both a curse and a gift. The little shadow had grown, and it would never fade.